right.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I think we're going to get started. So if everyone could please put their computers on mute, that would be helpful. That would be great. So good morning, Happy New Year, and welcome to the second annual Northwest Illinois Volunteerism Conference. I'm Pam Clark-Reidenbach with the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence. NICNI and the Leadership Exchange on Volunteerism participants with support from Serve Illinois Commission, AJ Gallagher and Company, and Imperial Punch of Rockford present a full year of online interactive volunteer management programming focused on creating a culture of connection and inclusion in volunteerism. Each monthly session includes a 1-hour presentation, followed by a 1-hour group discussion that's moderated. Today, our moderator is our friend Carrie Acevedo, the Executive Director of the Rockford Area Habitat for Humanity. We ask all participants to mute their computers for better reception for all, and to type questions into the chat box, which we will monitor. You have the opportunity at the end of the presentation and during the discussion to unmute and participate in Q&A and the dialogue. So let's get started. It is truly my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, who will be speaking on the topic of managing across generations through six-hat thinking. Jordan Devink is the Director of Donor Relations at CYN Counseling Center. He is an experienced nonprofit capacity builder with over 12 years experience in nonprofit management. He is also an author and TEDx talk presenter, bringing over 5 years experience in workshop facilitation. He's a graduate of Leadership Greater Union Grove and Leaders in Action Crystal Lake. Jordan is also an experienced fund development officer, skilled in event management, strategic planning, board governance, and grant writing. We are so pleased to have him with us today. So please help me to welcome Jordan Devink.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation. I wonder if I have screen sharing abilities. Let me just do this and see if I do. Yes, I do. We'll go ahead and get started on my end. Okay, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Pam and Billy. This has been a topic that I have talked on for many years now and have been able to successfully use in my personal career as well. One of the greatest mentors that I had taught me this, and I have been able to see it used successfully over time and be able to kind of tweak it as time goes along as well. Like Pam says, I have a vast array of experiences within the nonprofit sector. It is truly my pleasure to work in the nonprofit sector. I want to say that first and foremost. I wouldn't have it any other way. There's just something so great about being passionate about the job that you do, good days and bad days, and being able to find tools like these that help make it better, not only for your work, but also the clients that you serve and the people who directly serve those clients as well. If you wouldn't mind helping me by using the chat function a little bit today, it would be helpful for me as I go through today, have an understanding of about how many volunteers you interact with throughout your organization. So you can just use that chat box and drop in there, just drop in a number of volunteers, rough sketch. That will give me an idea of what I'm working with today. But I'll go ahead and get started as I look through that. And we'll just move forward. So six-hat thinking we'll get to a little later, but I really wanted to talk about emotional intelligence at work, because it really is one of the crux of what we do as fundraisers and as people who work in the nonprofit sector. I have worked very hard on this throughout my professional career to be excellent in the area of emotional intelligence, and yet be able to continue to learn and grow, because that is so important when we're working with donors, when we're working with clients of different and various abilities, and when we're working with staff of different generations. There is so much that we can learn from each other. And so I wanted to just take a little time to talk about emotional intelligence and the emotionally intelligent fundraiser. So David Goleman, who wrote What Makes a Leader, and he also wrote the Emotional Intelligence book, talks about 5 areas of emotional intelligence in his workplace, in the workplace. They go from self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skill. And I really want to talk about the hallmarks and give you kind of an understanding of some of those hallmarks. So when it comes to self-awareness, we really want to talk about a realistic self-assessment. Are we doing what we think we are doing, and does it make sense to those around us as well? Just having that moment and those times in our work where we assess what we're doing and the reactions it is having on other people, or the reactions it is producing in other people. Self-regulation, trustworthiness and integrity. We all know that that's a core in fundraising. When we fundraise, we really need to have the trust of the donors. We need to have the trust of the foundations and the grant makers who are giving us those monies. And we need to be able to regulate that through openness to change as well. So how many times have we not gotten a grant request because they wanted us to change something, or perhaps they gave us some feedback at the end? Are we open to that self-regulation in changing things as time goes along and then applying maybe next year? Motivation. We are all motivated so differently. It is fascinating when you really dive into self-motivation, what motivates people. For some, it's leaving a legacy. For others, it's getting to the top of the ladder, whatever that may be. There's so many different motivations, but really it's a strong drive to achieve. And it really needs to stem into organizational commitment. My generation probably struggles with that area a little more than other generations, and we'll get to talking about generations in a little bit. But I'm a firm believer that if you can commit to an organization for a long period of time, that is the best. There is so much good that comes through watching years worth of work develop in an organization and committing to overcoming obstacles and committing to celebrating those wins. Empathy. You would think that that would be at the top of the list when it comes to emotional intelligence. I don't think these are in any order, but here it is. Cross-cultural sensitivity and service to clients and customers. I love being able to talk to our program staff and getting them to see, especially program staff who don't fully understand perhaps the work that a fund development person does or the work that a development office does, getting them to understand the relationship that we should be having with each other so that we can serve clients better, so that we can have customers repeat their time with us, so that we can encourage people to be more self-reliant as they go through years of services and become more in tune with what their needs are and what their own motivations are. And then your social skills, persuasiveness. That is a valuable asset when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to program strategy. Being able to persuade those that you are working with and those that you are hoping to give some dollars to your organization, being able to have that influence and using it as a partnership. So I want to add that. So persuasion isn't control over people. It is not manipulation. It is not perhaps what more of an authoritarian approach. It really needs to be a partnership. I'm persuading you to come on board with me. I'm persuading you to work with me. I'm persuading you so that I can better understand you and you can better understand me. And then expertise in building and leading teams. So that really falls into what I was just saying. It's all about that team mentality. Sometimes the leader does need to take a lead role and really direct the conversation. But with today's topic of six-hat thinking, it is all about the leader stepping aside and hearing from the audience of people that they have working underneath them, working alongside them, and working above them at times as well. Like I said, I've used this topic many times, not only in the workplace, but also as a topic for conversation within nonprofit capacity building, board development. And it has been wonderful to see folks who are very good at thinking through things, but not very good at sharing things, step forward and share these fantastic thoughts. It also has been great to see people who are leaders get the chance to actually be a leader in that conversation. So I just wanted to give an overview of emotional intelligence. Just like impact and heart is at the core of what we do with fundraising, I believe emotional intelligence is at the core of our success in fundraising and in program and in the nonprofit realm. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in. Oh, I do see a little chat box. Great, 180. Oh, some large numbers here. Great, wonderful. Okay, that helps me understand better what I'm working with. Thank you for those of you who dropped that in. We'll go to the next slide. Oh, I hit it and it's not working. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So let's talk about generations, all right? So where do I belong? It is always interesting to note that right now we are entering into the first time, one of the first times I believe, that 4 generations will be in the workplace together, roughly. Some will be in part-time work as they head into retirement, and some will be in part-time work as they get their first jobs. But there is a variety of workplaces, workplace generations taking place right now. And we all, as we just saw, have different motivation levels and different skill levels as well. So Gen Z, they are specifically impact over long-time career. So when we talked about commitment to organization, this might be an area that they need to work on, but they definitely have impact down. They definitely want to see growth results. They tend to be those startup folks. They tend to be ditch the corporate job, go to California, work with sustainable gardening or something like that. They want to see their work really play out for them. Gen Y, they value work and life balance. So that's just something to note. It's a very different approach, I think, than other generations. And it was very interesting when it first came up. And I know it was a struggle, especially in the corporate sector, of how do we manage this next generation who really wants that work-life balance, and they don't want to work at the office, 10 hours a day. They want to have some time, but they also want, higher salaries. They want time off. They want all these things. So how do we manage that? Again, it's those expectations and those motivations. Gen X has primarily embraced a hands-off management approach. You tell me what I need to do, I'm going to go do it, and you trust that the work will get done. And so that tends to be their motto and the mantra, and it has been successful for their generation as well. And there's no right or wrong here. This is just what research and studies have shown right now. And it's helpful when we talk about 6-hat thinking to understand that volunteers across all generations are engaging at this time with each other. And then the baby boomers value measurements in results. So they really are focused on seeing a measurable area of success. And I think measurement is a little different than impact. Impact tends to be a little more of a heart-driven resource, and measurement, while it is definitely for those folks at heart, they believe in the work they do and they're solid in the work they do, they want to see a physical measurement, or kind of like a thermometer going up, if you will, within a fundraising goal. And so just some interesting things to think about when we talk about generations and when we dive more specifically into 6-hat thinking. I'm going to just check the chat box, make sure there's no questions. Oh, it's not popping up. All right, well, we'll continue moving on. So let's talk about partnerships. When we talk about partnerships, it's all about why how you start is important. So when you are forming a partnership, we all have that person, we'll just call person, in our organization that we spend the most amount of time with. It could be development director to executive director. It could be executive director to board president. It could be development officer to fundraising chair. It could be a variety of things. It could be marketing person to development person. We have that person that we spend the most amount of time to. And it is very important that when we start those relationships and when we build those partnerships, we think of 3 things. What are the learning styles of that person? What are the thinking styles of that person? And what are the motivational styles of that person? And I have more slides, an outline that I'll send afterwards so that you have these. But when we think about learning styles, we think about how people process information and how they use it to work in the workplace. When we think about thinking styles, we think about 2 things: out loud processors and in their head processors. So I, probably you can guess, tend to be more of an out loud processor. I need to hear things in conversation. I need to hear the dialogue. I need to be persuaded through mannerisms and facial expressions and passion behind the words. Other people need time to think about it. They need time to process the information. This might be too much for them, and that is okay. That is an area I had to learn in my first development job very quickly, because I had a boss who I struggled with. I thought she was fantastic. So I came in thinking, man, this is going to be wonderful to work for this woman. She gets me. I seem to get her. Not so much. I learned she was a processor in her head, and I was an out loud thinker. And I had to learn very quickly that, oh, it is too much for me to come into these meetings and rattle off all this stuff and expect answers and decisions in that meeting. And so what we had to learn very quickly was that there was a give and take. So I could come in with as much information as I wanted to come in with, but then I needed to give her time to come back to me. So we set a deadline later in that week. Not before and not after, but at that time, then she would give me responses. And she would allow me to rattle off as much information as possible, as long as I put it in writing so that she could go back and think about it, process it, and then come back to me. So that's just one example of a partnership where our thinking styles didn't match up, but we made it work successfully. And then motivation styles. What motivates people? You know, we just talked about some emotional intelligence stuff, but people are motivated across the board. When I think of donors and what motivates them to give and why they have given to organizations I've worked with over the past, it's things like leaving a legacy. It's things like being associated with a winner. It's things like having that impact where they can actually see, you know, a tree growing, or recycling, you know, grounds cleaned up, things that are actually physical, or perhaps they want to be a part of watching that $50,000 total go up over time. They want to see those measurable results. So understanding what motivates us is so important when we form partnerships. And then it is also key to remember that these are ongoing conversations. This doesn't just happen once. It needs to happen over time, and it needs to be frequent, because many times we get stuck in a rut, and many times we forget, oh, that's right, so-and-so needs time. And sometimes when there are deadlines or there are crunches to our expectations, we forget about these really good, emotionally intelligent patterns that we put in place, and we forget to practice them. Years ago, I had this thought that fund development is like any other workplace career, if you will. There is a set of rules that you follow. They sometimes and perhaps consistently change over time, but the core of what we do is consistent to refining the practice. So we need to consistently be working towards refining our practice, going over and over again, forming habits, changing to new habits, discovering what makes people work, and we need to be consistent in refining those practices. So now let's go to this slide. So how you start is important. Just some tips. Do you enjoy spending time with the person? Things to think through when you think about learning styles, thinking styles, motivation styles. Number two, do you identify each other's strengths and weaknesses and define your roles within your company? This can be for volunteers too. I am a firm believer that if it is not working out with a volunteer, that conversation needs to be had. I also think from a different perspective, if there is a staff member that is not treating volunteers in the way that perhaps they should, those conversations also should be had. And so just understanding your role, my role, and the strengths and weaknesses that we bring to the table. Tip three, discuss each other's needs and expectations. Learning styles, thinking styles, motivation styles, that's the core of what that is. I have an expectation in the workplace that when I come into a meeting, I'm going to be able to share what I have, but I also have the expectation now as a person who has gone through six-hat thinking and understanding this kind of topic that people may not take what I give them right away and have a response for me. It may take them some time, and that is okay. I am expecting that when I go into meetings now, and I'm okay with that. Tip four, communicate often. Remember that consistent, ongoing conversation. These are conversations that we continually need to be a part of over time. There's no right or wrong communication style, except that silence does not work. So if my boss had said nothing, that would have been very frustrating for me, because I would have thought, okay, what is going on here? She's not taking me seriously. She doesn't like my work. I may have taken it personally. I would have thought maybe that she was looking for somebody else to replace me, or she wanted somebody else to do that work. Silence doesn't work. But if you say, I hear you, I need time to process the information, let's set a deadline at the end of the week to come back to this. Or if you say, you know what, this is a simple enough thing, I have an answer, I knew you were coming in with this, I've thought about it already. Some sort of communication needs to be given, and we need to understand that we need to expect those things and become more aware of how those communications are going to take place, but understand that silence just doesn't work within this area. And then tip 5, plan for the future, together or apart. So again, we can't control people. We can only empower people and partner with people. And so if somebody wants to partner with us, let's plan for the future. If somebody doesn't want to partner with us, let's plan to partner apart. Let's plan to go our separate ways. Let's plan to know that what work you did give was of value at the time that you gave it, and it will continue to be of that, but maybe it's your time to step into another realm. If you're an employee of an organization, maybe it's your time to take on something more challenging or something less challenging based on your home life, but plan for the future, whatever that may be. I see the chat box has opened up. There is a question here about what happens to folks in the 2 generations older than the boomers. Many of them are volunteers. That is a really good question, and unfortunately I'm not prepared to give an answer to that at this point. I apologize. I think like anything else, I expect that when people volunteer, you as an organization are giving good criteria, good expectations up front of what volunteer expectations are. You are doing things like understanding learning skills, motivation skills, thinking styles, and that should be able to help understand what those older generations want out of their volunteer experience. For them, it may be a little more to the heart of who they are, given that they are entering an area of life where volunteerism is one of their main functions on a day-to-day basis. So having a good understanding of learning, thinking, and motivation styles will really help that. But as far as a slide, I apologize, I didn't have that in there, but I could follow up later if somebody wanted more. I see another question here. Give me a second to read it. Yes, so this person says sometimes listening silence does not work, and yet there is a value to listening empathetically. So again, going back to that emotional intelligence, what's our empathy level? Do we have the ability to be cross-culturally sensitive? Do we have the expertise to build and retain talent? And do we have the empathy to serve clients and our customers? I think that's super important. I apologize, I just skipped screens as I was trying to do the chat box. All right, I'm going to close the chat box and we'll move forward. So let's talk about 6-hat thinking. 6-hat thinking is all about how do I process new information and how do I respond to the information. So 6-hat thinking is a role-playing model developed by Edward de Bono in 1986, and it was actually developed for a marketing scheme. So they were developing how to market certain products, and instead of doing what we today might call like a case study or having people sit in a room and answer questions about how they viewed the product, they did something like this where they broke down different thinking styles and had people listen to other people's thinking styles, and that's what created this. It's a brainstorming technique that can be used to explore problems and come up with solutions and uncover ideas and options that might otherwise be overlooked by maybe a specific category of thinkers. So let's break this down, shall we? When we talk about 6-hat thinking, we talk about it in hats, colored hats specifically, and we want to start with an understanding of the white hat first. That's typically where I like to start because it is the non-judgmental hat, and it gets people thinking just about facts. So it's data, it's information we can record that is currently available and to identify further information that may be needed. There is no emotion here. There is no new ideas here. There is no negative perspective here. This is simply what information am I being given, and what can I pull out specifically. So I have a scenario later on, and we'll go through that, and you can use the chat box to help provide that. But as we go through, it might be helpful for you if you've got some pen and paper in front of you or a Word document in front of you to kind of come up with your 6 categories, come up with these 6 hats, and just kind of label them, because that might help you see as we go further down the road here what each of these hats do. Then we want to move into the red hat. It is super important that you set a time limit for this hat. And set a time limit that feels appropriate. So if you need to go a little longer, that's fine, but in the back of your mind, have a time that you want to spend on this. The red hat is associated with feelings, intuition, and emotion. So it can become very heated sometimes. It is a very passionate response because people are talking from their core, from their gut. They're talking typically from their daily lives and what impacts that. Remember, when we do six hat thinking, we are trying to solve a problem. We are trying to brainstorm. We are trying to uncover new solutions, and many people may not feel like a new solution is required. And so they may have a really passionate response to what is going on here. The red hat allows people to put forth feelings without prejudice. That is also really important, is that when you are doing this in a group, or perhaps when you just are doing this for yourself, allow yourself the feeling of not feeling judged. Make sure that the people you are working with when you're doing this don't understand that we are not judging here. This is an opportunity that as an employee or as a colleague, you can say what you want respectfully, professionally, with emotional intelligence, and you can do it passionately at the same time. Then I would say go on to that yellow hat. It is always good to follow up the passionate, potentially negative feelings with the positive. So as we look at a scenario, what are the positive things I can pull out from this? If I am going to make this change, how will it be better than the current situation I'm in? It benefits the situation. The hat encourages a positive view even in people who are always critical. So one of the things about six hat thinking is that we all typically think with one or two hats predominantly throughout the day. It is pretty hard to think with all five or all six. The blue hat tends to be one that we all work with regardless. And so when we think about the yellow hat, sometimes it is hard to get people to be positive about things, especially when they don't think change needs to happen, when they don't think a solution is needed. And so this is an area where as you are navigating this with your team, it would be wise to encourage everybody to come up with at least one positive thing. Many people will come up with many things, but I would encourage you to really focus in on your volunteers, or perhaps if you have staff members, focus in on who those people are that you know tend to be a little more negative, they tend to be a little more shy, it might be harder for them to deal with change, and really encourage them to see this hat in a new light as an opportunity to provide positivity. Let's go to the black hat. So the black hat relates caution. So I would encourage you to not see this hat as negative. There's going to be a slide further that denotes it as negative, and I keep that in there because that's the general nature of six hat thinking, is the black hat is the negative hat. But really think about this as caution and as your risk assessment. What am I not seeing that could go wrong? This is critical judgment, not stereotypical judgment, not judging for the sake of judging. This is critical judgment. If we do this, what are the red flags that I'm missing? Sometimes it's easy to overuse this hat. So again, it is important to have a time limit in the back of your mind as the leader of this group to know, okay, after a certain amount of time, I need to move on. The black hat also, one voice does not have veto power over another voice. So just because somebody thinks that this is the worst idea ever, I can't stand it, you're going to ruin my personal life, you're going to ruin my work schedule, it's going to affect this, and this, that doesn't mean we're done here, close shop, this didn't work. That is one opinion. Let's have some other opinions. It does not veto all other opinions. And you as the leader should be prepared to moderate that, because I think a lot of people are very good at critical judgment, but they also sometimes err on it being judging for the sake of judging, or potentially see it as an opportunity to give feedback that they normally wouldn't give to a supervisor or a volunteer coordinator. Okay, so then again, set your time limit with the black hat. If you need to go a little longer, but beware of the traps potentially that come in. Really look at it as risk assessment. Then you want to follow up with another positive type of thinking, the green hat. It is creative thinking, generating new ideas. So what about this new idea or this change have we not considered that we could add to it? Is there something creative that we're not thinking of? When I use this in the past, I had a lot of people come up with things where I was like, wow, yeah, I didn't even think about that. That sounds great. And what was even better, it came from people who are typically silent processors, who don't typically share their ideas, who think inside their head. And so it was very exciting as a supervisor, as a volunteer manager, to see, oh my gosh, I knew they had it within them. I knew they were thinking through things. I'm so excited that they're sharing their information, because this really helps us grow as a whole group. And it helps the people who are predominantly in the voices see some other voices take place as well. Brainstorm the possibilities, no wrong answers. But reasoning is needed here. So not fact, perhaps, but give a reason why you think it would be better. So don't just say, you know, let me think of an example. Well, I'll use one from the slide that's coming up. Don't just say that I don't want to switch to a different shift because it's going to affect the time I come into work. Give a reason. You know, I think this might be better because many of us have children at home. It's hard for us to find daycare. If we switch shifts now, perhaps it'll affect that. Give a reason so that leaders and people can think through the possibilities of what they're trying to present, because leaders don't think through everything all at once. And the goal of doing this is that they have the opportunity to see what the volunteers come up with. They have the opportunity to see what their staff come up with, and they can be challenged by that and grow themselves as leaders. And then your blue hat. That's tends to be your final hat, but I also would encourage you to use the blue hat throughout, because I do think as a leader, you're using the blue hat all the time. It is your process control. It is your narration. It is your wrap up tool. So typically when we talk about the red and the black hat, we're using our blue hat also at the same time, especially if we're timing things. It is really important to have a good understanding of what we're doing so that we can kind of narrate things, control things a little bit within a process, not control for the sake of control, control for a process. It is used for thinking about thinking. So what did we talk about? Does it make sense? The blue hat summarizes, it concludes, it makes decisions. It is important when you do this portion to say, thank you so much for providing feedback. We will make our decision shortly, but do not promise anything. It is very important to make sure that your employees, your volunteers, your people you're partnering with understand that this is an opportunity to engage, to partner, to share ideas, to have thought processes, to be challenged. But this is not a promise that things are going to go one way or the other. This is an opportunity to summarize, to conclude, and to make decisions. Now, you may have already made the decision based on having all this information, but you may have not also. So just make sure that you're not promising anything. Okay, nothing in the chat box. Okay, any questions so far? Feel free to drop them in the chat box. Okay, so again, when we talk about thinking styles, we want to talk about how we respond to things. So the white hat is we're responding objectively. The red hat, it's our intuition, it's our gut, it's our core. What are we feeling? What's the emotion we have behind it? The red hat, it tends to be negative, but it really should come from a place of risk assessment. When I hear this information, I respond with this. The yellow hat is the positive. This is what's good about this opportunity. This is what's good about this change. I'm going to respond positively. The green hat, thinking creatively. Oh my gosh, did we consider this? Or hey, when we do this, I feel like it's going to have a better effect because such and such down the road. And then your blue hat, the process. Make sure that you maintain that process through the whole thing, and make sure that you end with the process too. Conclude, summarize, make a decision. Don't promise. Great. Okay, I was just checking the chat box one more time. Okay, so this is where I wonder if, oh, I have one more slide here. That's right. So what aren't you asking yourself? Let's dive a little deeper into each of these hats. And this is where you can use the chat box. I'm going to pull up my chat box here. If you'd like to type in your responses, I'll give a couple seconds for each one. But what is your go-to hat? After looking at all these hats and after thinking about how we interact with volunteers, leadership, colleagues, donors, staff, what do you think you go to predominantly? Which of these hats do you really operate throughout the day with? I would say I tend to operate in more of a risk assessment hat. It's a struggle for me to operate in some of the other ones. I see red flags everywhere I go. So I have to work on that area for me professionally. Somebody says the green and blue. First yellow, next blue, with meetings specifically. That's great. Yeah, there are many of us who have a skill in processing and narrating meetings. That's really a skill level. Green hat, fantastic. Red and green, yeah. It's so important to be able to think through these things and know that we use multiple hats. The more emotionally intelligent you are, the more hats you can use throughout the day. I often find myself using these hats in individual settings. Somebody said something to me or I walked away from the meeting and I think, man, nobody else had the same reaction I had. Why is that? Let me go through these hats real quick, or let me just think through what the information was, and it really helps. Red and white, good. We have some fact people. Yellow and green, green and blue. Okay, wonderful. This is great information. I appreciate everybody contributing. Let's go to the next question. What is the last hat, which is the last one you use? So where do you think you struggle? So for me, I struggle with the yellow hat. It is sometimes hard for me to be positive about things because I tend to rely on risk assessment a lot to get me through strategies and to help formulate things. Somebody says yellow, somebody says red. Red is the hat I have to be more intentional about using. Red. Lot of red. Black, black, black. All right, black. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Every answer is correct. One thing I do want to say about red, and I forgot to mention this early, one of the other reasons we set a time limit as leaders in the back of our mind with the red and the black hat is that we want to avoid numbing and overindulgence. So sometimes things can be overindulgent, and when you are brainstorming and when you're running things with a team or volunteers, you want people to be involved, you want to empower them, and sometimes that translates to people doing and saying whatever they want, and sometimes that can be overindulgent. And so just understand that the reason we set a time limit in the back of our head as leaders for those hats is we want to avoid that numbness to hearing negativity all the time. We want to avoid overindulging too much negative perspective, and we want to also have time for the other positive hats. Okay, next question. Which is your subconscious hat? So when we think about things, sometimes we think about things and we have an instant reaction. We don't actually process it. It's just the emotional reaction, or it's just the reaction we have. I believe that sometimes I have a red hat reaction to a lot of things. I tend to have a very high, excuse me, I've lost my words here. Justice. Justice is really important for me, and I tend to react less on fact and more on the red emotional reaction for things. So when there's not justice or when things are not just, I tend to react really strongly, and I tend to have an emotional reaction to it without even thinking. Black. Black is anxiety. Blue, red. Okay. Black is where I tend to start from and go back to. Colleen. Green, red to my reactions, but I keep to myself. Yeah. Another area of emotional intelligence. Can we keep some things to ourselves? Do we have the ability there? Okay. How do you work with other hats unlike yours? So think about a colleague, think about a partner, think about somebody in your area. How do you react to them when they give their red hat? How do you react to them when they are constantly in their positive, bubbly, sunny hat? And maybe you're not that hat. Throw out some ideas. No wrong answers. I listen. Yeah, great. I try to put myself in their hat. Yeah. Again, this is why it's so important to understand learning styles, thinking styles, and motivation styles, because it really gives us insight to what hats people wear all the time. I try to understand the way they process and see it from their perspective. Great. I have to process what they're saying first. Sometimes I get too many steps ahead of myself. Yeah, I would say I tend to have too many steps ahead of myself because I've thought big picture 10 steps down the road when I'm coming to that meeting, and sometimes I have to back it up a little bit. If they're using their black hat too much, I ask them to come up with something good rather than always going to the negative. Remember, yes, black hat can be negative, but it also can be a risk assessment tool. And I think sometimes we forget as leaders that risk assessment is really important. It's a critical part of strategy. It's a critical part of understanding why we partner with people. I don't respond right away, so I don't react. Great. Recognizing others need prompting for their hat. Yeah, some people need to think beyond their own hat. Red hats, I try to let them express then redirect their emotion to have them settle down. If it's positive, I try to adapt to that understanding. If it's negative, I have to practice being positive with them. Sometimes I have to go away and think about the person, what the person has shared, and process through it myself. Great, this is all good. Wonderful stuff here. All right, so let's dive into the meat of what we're doing here. Again, this is where I really would encourage you to have a sheet of paper, have a Word document, come up with your columns, white, red, yellow, black, green, blue, because you're gonna wanna jot down some information. You can jot it down on your notepads, and you can also put it in the chat box. But I'm gonna share a scenario that I've experienced myself. And then I'm going to ask us all to partake in going through it through each hat and looking at each hat specifically. Here we go. Okay, so, I'm gonna have to move my little screen thing around here so I can read it. Okay, so putting on the hats. This is the scenario. You work at a boarding school that provides post-secondary education for adults with intellectual disabilities. The school provides academic programming during the day, and in the evenings and on the weekends, provides residential life activities and living skills supports to these students. Remember, they have developmental and intellectual disabilities. During the first 3 years of your time there was a supervisor that managed Monday through Thursday weekday teams, and a supervisor that managed Friday through Sunday weekend teams. During the summer of your third year, it became apparent that some staffing changes were about to occur. Some of the indicators to these changes were the time spent with students between weekday and weekend staff, its impact on relationships. Remember, relationships are super important. How we think, how we learn, how we're motivated. Student support and tracking. So within a developmental disability field, there is a lot to being able to track student success, to being able to have documentation that reports behaviors, things like that. And an increase in staffing needs and skill sets as student populations increased and disabilities diversified. Let me give you a little context. This is a school I worked at previously, and I was one of the supervisors here. In the time that I was there for about 5 years, we went from a population of 30 students to 120 students. So if you can think about diversity in disability sets, that is significant. When we started, we had mostly students with autism, Asperger's, more on the spectrum. By the time I left, we were dealing with things like auditory processing disorders, some sensitivity to light, sound, and touch, so things that are a little more difficult, if you will. I am going to try and move my screen once more here to read the rest of this. Okay, so the solution. On one day, the weekend and the weekend teams were assembled, and the following change, this is the big brainstorm, this is the problem solving, the following plan was laid out. Instead of having weekend and weekday teams, we were going to switch to a Sunday through Wednesday shift or a Wednesday through Saturday shift. 4 days, 10-hour shifts. Wednesday would be an overlap day with team meetings starting at 1 p.m. and housing area meetings and training. So previously, there was no meetings that overlapped the weekend staff with the weekday staff. So it was kind of shift takeover, and then everybody runs out the door. So there was really no communication other than communication logs. And when you're working in an area with developmental disabilities, that can be a little tedious. So this idea came about having this opportunity to overlap for communication. Remember those consistent, ongoing conversations? This was the thought process there. There would be a campus coordinator and a residential life supervisor. One would handle communication and records, and one would handle staff, volunteers, and workplace expectations. Both would support students and both would support staff with student success. So I'm gonna go back a slide, and I'm going to pull up the 6-hat thinking so you can see those again. But as we talk about this, I want you to think about the following things: emotion, facts, context, client need, longevity of staff, age and experience, compensation, family time, and disability. So those are a list of things that as we go through each one should help you pull out the facts. It should help you pull out emotions. It should help you pull out some of these things that we want to break down, and I will guide along the way as well. Let me just check the chat box. Yes, I will flash the color chart back up, absolutely. And I can go in between each one as well. So I can go back to that scenario. Okay, so this is where you get to use that chat box. Let's start with the white hat. So what were some of the facts to the situation in front of us? Seemingly, there was an issue predominantly with staffing, it seemed like. There was some communication issues, perhaps. Think about what some of the facts are with that, and let's pull out what the facts are. Go ahead and use that chat box. There it is. I'm going to pull it up. It's data. It's information. White, saw the data and the information. Okay. Great. Yes, no overlap between shifts to share info previously, right? So communication was done on a computer in a log. You had to log in when staff came in. They had to spend the first 15 minutes doing that and reading about a whole week's worth of communication rather than spending time with students right away or having that midweek meeting. Absolutely, that was a crucial part of this. The information being about the overlap and the organization growing and changing. Yes, students' population went from 30 to 120. If you think about disabilities and people working within that field, if you think about the volunteer need for that kind of work, if you think about managing expectations, that is a significant increase and does take some consideration when thinking about staffing. Meetings could be inconvenient for weekend staff. Yeah, if you're working a weekend, I would say predominantly the weekend staff were college students. So they were local college students who came in and got full-time hours by working Friday through Sunday. They lived on campus with the students. They slept overnight. They couldn't come in and do a meeting during the week. We weren't using Zoom back then to do meetings like we are today, although that could have been a solution, I think. Any surveys of students and or parent feedback? Absolutely, yes. I will say that there were some specific things that parents noted. There were also some specific things that higher level students noted as well. Increased student numbers, longer shifts for staff. Is that going to impact morale and turnover? Yes, this falls a little bit into the red hat, so we'll go back to that one as well. I'll make a little note here about morale. But absolutely the longer shifts. We are going from 8-hour shifts to 10-hour shifts, but fewer days. One of the facts, yep, greater ease for students. Seemingly, it would look that way. It's a little, that one might be a little assuming and might fall a little more into the positivity level. So I'll make a note under that one for about ease for students. All right, I'm going to just, if you don't mind, flip back to this and pull out a couple other things. So I would say one thing that also was difficult was the supervisory level. So one person supervised a weekend team, one person supervised a weekday team, and there was really no communication between the two of how things were done. There also was a very clear understanding that the weekend team was a little superior to the weekend team because they were a little more college educated, they worked full time, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, so there was that corporate kind of idea of I work Monday through Friday versus I work a weekend shift. So there was that. Yes, I'm going to pull this radical schedule changes to the red hat. It looks like we're ready to move on to that. So let me, oh, I apologize here. I just flipped out of my thing. let's go on to the red hat. Associated with feelings. So when you look at the scenario, what is your gut reaction? What makes it difficult for you? I see a lot of really good stuff coming in here, so I'll dive in. Radical schedule changes and not enough time to adapt. Absolutely. Remember thinking styles. Remember learning styles. It might be too much information to process all at once, and you might have a gut reaction of like, oh, this is overwhelming. I imagine you had a lot of people upset with the schedules being disrupted. Many people had probably built their schedules around being either weekday workers or weekend workers, absolutely, and to have to change would be a struggle for them. You probably had parents upset about having to find different childcare, or people with other jobs complaining about working around these schedules. Some students were probably also upset at having their school schedules potentially overlapped. Yes, those are great, absolutely. Somebody else says superiority complex. Absolutely, there were people on the weekday staff who thought, man, I was working Monday through Friday and now you want me to work a weekend day? What? There were also people on the weekend who thought similarly, you know, I specifically work weekends because I'm a college student, or I volunteer somewhere else during the weekday, and so I want to get my time in. I want to get my 40 hours in on the weekend. I want to come in Friday, leave Sunday. So yeah, absolutely. Upset and curious about yeah, so I'm sorry, I have trouble read that one. So I think it's noting the frustration between scheduling. Absolutely, that was a gut reaction for a lot of people. You're changing my schedule? How is this going to impact me? How are salaries affected? Does that change? Does it change authority also? So previously some superiority was put over the weekend staff of not being weekday staff. Effect of change on students. Many may need specific routines. So yeah, again, students were at the core here. People with learning disabilities are not had been considered. I think it goes both ways. We considered that potentially relationships weren't being as strongly built by the weekend staff with the students because they're there for a short amount of time. They're doing more fun activities than daily living skills. And so there's a different relationship there. There is also more time spent in a condensed amount of days versus less time spent across a larger period of time. The shift supervisors were chosen from the previous supervisors. So one took on the role based on skill set and one took on the role based on another skill set. So I was one of the supervisors. I took on the clerical filing communications role, and the other one took on the staff management. So those supervisors remained in their supervisory role. We just split the obligations. Previously, we both were doing it. And now we just split to format to abilities and skill set. Childcare. Yeah, many of our staff during the weekday had children. Their wives worked previously, and so that was a difficult. So all of a sudden you need me to come in on a weekend, that's not going to work for me because my work works a weekend. So that all takes effect. Let's go to the yellow hat. This is really great stuff. I'm glad to see this working on a Zoom call. This is exciting for me. Let's go to yellow hat. So let's talk about positivity. Let's talk about things that are making sense. What is exciting about this? What is encouraging? Can you find the good in the situation? If this happens today, could I have a better future tomorrow? Shorter work week. Absolutely. I only have to work 4 days a week. You have an additional day off if you're a weekday staff. If you're a weekend, you work an additional day, actually. Better communication. Absolutely. Our communication was far more streamlined when we had one person focusing on it. Seems more fair to have each group working one weekend day. Absolutely. It was fair for staffing. It was fair for relationships building with the students. It was fair for documentation and behaviors. More time with students builds relationships. Yes, that was really the core of what we were trying to get at. We didn't come out and say that at the beginning, but that really was what we threaded through the entire conversation is that staff would pick up on the relationship fractures and how we could better build those. easier to build relationships with clients, able to do projects with clients that you may not have time for in 8 hours. Yeah, absolutely. Many of the staff during the weekday spent a lot of their time in the office, semi-unproductive, not a lot to do. And then when students ended their class time at 2 o'clock, then they dove into hands-on learning till about 9 p.m. Individual living skills, going out into the community, having volunteers come in and do tasks or projects with them, things like that. So it made things a little more productive. Better support for clients. Absolutely. Everyone was on the same page. We had a weekday meeting midweek. You talked about what happened the first 3 days. You talked about what the expectation was going to be for the next 3 days. And there was this nice, clean overlap. You also had this exciting opportunity for people who, like me, thrive off of facial expression and mannerism and being involved in front of people. You had that successfully checkmarked for those people. So instead of just reading a communication log, they were able to hear back and forth and really get a full sense of what had taken place by mannerisms, by voice, and really build relationships with the staff also. Wonderful. This is great stuff. I appreciate it. Somebody said earlier, ease of scheduling or ease for clients as well. That was really important too. Let's dive into the black hat, shall we? The black hat, remember, it is a little more negative, but we want to think about it as risk assessment. If we do this, what potentially are we not considering? And remember, one voice doesn't veto another. What people probably quit over. Absolutely. That was the #1 concern that we had raised, is that I may not be here if you do this. Loss of staff due to unhappiness. I'm not working 10 hours. Staff burnout. Why does it have to be this way? I don't want to work weekends. Or I think both. Yep, I don't want to work weekends and I don't want to work weekdays. I was comfortable with the way things were. May lose experienced staff. Yeah, you know, so that was an interesting one. While we did lose experienced staff, the staff that stayed on educated themselves and went back to school and actually found a career in the developments, the intellectual and developmental disability sector. Schedule may be barrier for college students, silent processors having to communicate face-to-face instead of on logs. Yes, I'm glad somebody pulled that out. So just as much as it is important for the people who want that face-to-face interaction, it was uncomfortable for the people who just wanted to read the communication log. They didn't want to be in a setting where they had to go back and forth with their colleagues. This was very uncomfortable for them, but it was exciting as a leader to say, you have thoughts there. I can see them turning in your brain. Let me pull them out of you and let me have this opportunity to see your leadership come through. Opposition to any change. Different supervisors have to change my duties. There were several comments about the supervisors. Yep, there were several comments about why do we have to change and yet your supervisors are going to stay the same. Why aren't you making those jobs up for application, you know? What support would be provided to help facilitate change? Absolutely. So at this point, we hadn't given any facilitation as far as how we would roll something like this out, predominantly because we weren't sure we were actually going to use it yet. But absolutely, that was a concern that people had. Well, if you're going to do this, we've got 3 months in the summer to do it. So how are you going to make that work? I assume you all caught this, but the students lived there from September to about May on the campus. So, and we had students from all over the world that lived there, and they were predominantly on the campus during those times. They went home during holiday breaks, and then 3 months in the summer. This is wonderful. Great stuff, guys. I really hope that you're taking notes yourself and really processing and thinking about those hats. Okay, time's up on the black hat. I'm going to call it. Let's go to green. What have we not considered? What are some new possibilities? No wrong answers. Give a little reasoning. Is there something about midweek meetings that doesn't work that we could do better? Is there something about different staff changes that we could do better? Yeah, this is great. Good work. New types of programming possible with staff skills on different schedules. Absolutely. Sometimes I had been, well, I'll say this. I'd been there for 5 years and I was running out of ideas for weekend groups and ideas. And so it was exciting for me that last year and a half to have new staff working on the weekend who helped come up with some new ideas for the clients, some new opportunities, some new volunteers to come in, kind of freshen things up a little bit. Chance to hire fresh new energy to fill gaps. Absolutely, yes. There were several people from a supervisory standpoint, I will say, that needed to move on. They had kind of run their course. They weren't as on board as we needed them to be when we did finally make the change. And so we got to invest in hiring some new talent. We also got to invest in moving people up in superiority. So because we did this kind of a communication with them, I got to see some really great talent from people that just weren't showing it previously. And I got to be able to influence their position in the organization. More consistent schedule for clients to know staff. Yeah. So if you think about spending 5 days a week with students versus spending 3 days a week, but all the time, it can be a little overwhelming to see somebody. How many of us have potentially become overwhelmed by being in the same house with somebody now because of quarantine for so long? It's a little overwhelming. I say I work from home professionally, and so does my husband. And so sometimes we need a break. It's a little much. We don't have separate like office doors. We have an open concept house, and so we can hear everything. And so sometimes that can be overwhelming, and to have that mixture really is sometimes what you need. Yeah. How did you choose the day of the week? Could you have made that day of meetings more flexible to meet staff needs? Absolutely. And actually, we ended up not going with Wednesday. We ended up going with, I think, a Tuesday. And it was just part of how we fix things around based on scheduling. Actually, I'm sorry. We went with a Tuesday and then actually ended up moving back to a Wednesday because it actually ended up working. Staff at that point got on board and made some changes to their lives as well. So absolutely, yep, we could have picked a different day. Wednesday made sense because it was midweek. It provided one weekend day for each group, so to speak. So 2 or 3 weekdays and then one weekend day. I apologize there, wrong scroll. What could be done to make weekend workers enjoy their work more? So yeah, absolutely. I think it got rid of the superiority complex. So that was the biggest thing it did there, is that it provided a team atmosphere. No longer am I just reading what somebody wrote. Now I am engaging with that person. I am partnering with that person. I'm a part of that greater mission. Opportunities to adapt to change. Absolutely. Could a meeting have been on a weekend? Absolutely. Yeah, we could have done that. These are great ideas. Opportunity to create better culture, routines, open dialogue among staff to foster a supportive environment for clients. Absolutely. I think that was the biggest positivity and the biggest new growth, is that we expected more and more relationships to grow. Could the work week rotate if needed so that everyone has the opportunity to have weekends off sometimes? Yeah. Great idea. I don't think we thought of that when we were doing it, so that's great. So 1 week you work a weekend, the next week you work and you have off the weekend. Might be able to reduce data entry, communication now that staff will overlap with one another, more meaningful data entry, more meaningful in-person communication. Fantastic, absolutely. Sometimes the weekday staff were waiting till the end of the week to put in their communication logs. So the communications were muddled. Days didn't always align. And so we learned that, no, that didn't happen this day, that happened 2 days previously, or you know, different things like that. Same with the weekend. Sometimes the weekend staff were waiting till the end of the weekend to do paperwork. Not okay. This streamlined it a little more efficiently, where midweek you had to have your paperwork in, and then the expectation was brought to you every week in person. That expectation was that at the end of the night, communication was turned into the supervisor who handled communication, and they did a check on, okay, I've got 10 people's communication logs, good to go, I'm gonna close out the night. Great. All right, let's move to the blue hat if there's no more green. This was fantastic. I'm really impressed at some of the stuff that came up with, some things that we did. So let's talk about narration, control, support, wrap up. This is typically where the supervisor or the leader comes into play, or the volunteer coordinator managing the volunteers. If you sit on a committee and you're the committee chair or you're the development officer for that committee, this is typically where you kind of take back the control of the, I shouldn't say control, I apologize. You take back the talking and the leading, the talking stick, if you will, and you kind of rein in that. So I'll narrate this as much as possible. Feel free to provide me feedback. This is where we said, thank you. Your input is valued. We hope that you saw a new side of your colleagues for the better. We hope that you saw some skill sets that you hadn't seen in yourself before. We hope you were challenged to think amongst these different hats. We hope you've thought about your role here in the organization and really had some great time, because how often are we unaware that people are constantly thinking about where their role is in the organization? People are constantly thinking about that. And so this gave us some perspective into that as well. And so what we did is we said, we're going to catalog all this information. As a leadership team, we're going to meet off screen here and talk a little more. We will get back to you with an answer, but we are not promising anything at this point. All decisions are up for an opportunity to be discussed. But it's just a clear sense of, this was excellent. Thank you for participating. We will get back to you when we've made a decision. And then those of you who pointed out like there was no facilitation of how this would change, how this would roll out, that we also provided that context of not only will we get back to you with an answer if we do change to go to this new schedule, we will have a facilitation plan in place at that time. So then you're not waiting another set of time to get that facilitation plan. And then there was this opportunity to also take back the information when it came time to do evaluations, to summarize, to explore new talents that the volunteers potentially had, that sort of thing. So the blue hat really, again, you're using it all through these 5 hats, but it is your final hat as well. And it is crucial to be able to have that wrap up. All right, so thank you for participating. Oh, I do have a question. With the blue hat, did you provide a timeline to them? So yes and no. We provided a deadline date. So we said we would have another meeting, I think it was 2 weeks. And at that time, we would provide an answer whether we were going to stay with what we were doing or we were going to change to something else. And if we changed this, we would have a facilitation process at that point. As the leader of the team, I like to let the team know that their thoughts, comments, and concerns are heard and what the changes will be. Immediate reinforcement and wrap up. Great. More equity of power among staff, not as much domination of structure. Absolutely. Yeah, the blue staff really the blue hat really enforces that. It really emphasizes, thank you for contributing. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. Thank you for letting us see your skill sets, your thinking styles, your motivation. That's what that blue hat is all about. I think I'm a little close to my time here. So if there's any follow-up questions, or if you want to just go right into the next portion of this, I'm happy to stop talking here. But I hope you saw some really great stuff in yourself about emotional intelligence. I hope you saw opportunities in your day when you use the 6 hat thinking without even realizing it. And I hope you find some areas that maybe you have coming up that you can use this.
Thanks, Jordan. That was awesome. Thank you so much. We're glad to have you stay with us for the next hour or so. If you are interested in being a part of the conversation, good. I see you shaking your head. Yes, I'm happy about that. So thanks for joining us and sharing that insight with us. So we had a lot of really great discussion today in answering questions and kind of, walking through the process. So we're going to Martisha's in an important meeting today for work, so she is not able to join us. So you have the pleasure of just getting me today to moderate the discussion. So let me first start by asking you what's your aha moment? Like, what was the thing that you heard or that you thought about during the presentation that was kind of your moment where you thought, oh, wow, I never thought about that, or I could really use that concept in my work. Lots of thank yous, Jordan. Everyone's very excited.
I guess for me, it was, it's not so much looking at the hats and seeing how I think as much as like how it's different from how other people in my organization might think. So it's like, it's understanding why there are sometimes discrepancies and miscommunications of thinking about certain tasks.
I love it, Matt. Just for everybody, everybody's reference, Matt and I work together.
Yeah, we have different hats.
And so that's really interesting that you say that, Matt, because when you think about our team, like, were you, when you were going through that for yourself, thinking about what color hats you wear, were you thinking about everybody else? Were you like, Carrie is definitely a white hat? Like, yeah, because I am like, give me more.
For sure.
Give me more facts. Give me more facts. Give me more. And I, you know, I oftentimes, I don't think about the risk, right? So like when I think about, I rarely wear my black hat. So it just, Matt, as I went through that process, I was thinking about you. And I was thinking about Caitlin and Greta and like everybody else, right? So interesting. All right, who else? I see a bunch of people took themselves off mute. Kimberly, I see you're off mute. What was your aha moment, my friend?
I just happened to be off mute, but I don't. I actually got disconnected. I'm so sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. You're fine. That's totally cool. Who else has kind of a moment where you thought about something that, you know, you hadn't thought about previously? Oh my gosh, Candy, you're so right. It's interesting to learn how I like people based on their hats. Okay, girl. Yes. Yes, I totally agree with you on that. Like I have a hard time. Yeah, like you recognize how you build relationships with people based on, you know, what kind of thinker they are. Pam, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I used this back in the late 80s, early 90s, I think, when I was at Northwest Community Center in our board. And what we did is we had people identify their hats that they identified with, but then we asked them to trade hats and have them look from a different perspective. And it was powerful, absolutely powerful.
Yeah. That's really cool. It's been around for a long time. Yeah.
I would say also, I use this with board members, and it, to that point of, it's interesting how we like people. I've learned it's interesting who I go to on the board when I need something done, because I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, you're going to get it immediately. I don't have to explain things to you. You're just going to take it and run with it. And sometimes that's wonderful. And sometimes it leaves out other characters on the board who may have skill sets that I probably could use to be advantageous.
Yeah. One of the things that was really interesting for me is that, so I'm the executive director of a nonprofit. So I report to a 16-member board of directors, which is overwhelming at best. I have 21 staff, right? So not at some point reporting up to me, right? We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volunteers who work with us on a regular basis. We have donors, right? So like I think about all of the like subgroups of people that I work with on a regular basis. But honestly, the thing I consistently floated to was my family. Like, what hat do I wear when I'm in a staff meeting with Matt and his colleagues versus what hat am I wearing when my stepson is here, right? Because he's like super charismatic and he's like super creative and he's like a super extrovert. And so when the two of us are in a room together, it is like a science experiment gone bad, right? So like we're fighting for talk time. It's like a volcano erupts in our house every time he's here, right? Like, so like I'm in my green mode, like super creative, super fun, right? When I'm home, and at work, I wear my white hat. Very few people said they wear their white hat first, but Matt will attest to this. Like the more data you can give me, the better off I am. Renee, I see you pointing at yourself. You're totally a data-driven, like give me all of the facts, and then I can start to figure out like, you know, how I interact and how I make decisions. Anybody else have like multiple groups of people that do you wear a different hat based on who you are and where you're at? Pam, I see you shaking your head. Barb, I see you shaking your head. Anybody have any examples you want to share of that? Trudy, I see you smiling.
Well, I've volunteered a lot of different places, and I feel like a lot of it's with kids, but it kind of differs depending on the age of the kids. Like one of the places I volunteer is our local library, and half the time there I'm working with elementary kids, half the time there I'm working with teens, and they definitely need to be treated differently because, I love them both in their own ways, but teens are, a little more draining in some ways and need to be treated and interacted with differently and, enjoy that. And then I have a few things I do that aren't kids, not a lot, but, I definitely need to think more about that and things when I'm working with adults than with kids. It's a lot more emotional and what are we going to do that's fun today?
I have to bring out my green hat when I work with college students, which is truly unique for me because I'm not a green hat person on here, and I really enjoy doing that. My aha moment was I actually have a volunteer on this meeting today, and it was bringing to her attention how she saw the team that she works on, what hats they wear. So I'm looking forward to her response to that. And then she says to me, and I quote in the private chat, I really need to make sure that I take this recording back to the team. And I responded that I definitely would do that.
Yeah. Barb, I know she's talking about you. Do you want to respond to that? This is what happens.
Oh my word. Thanks for putting me on the spot, Renee. I love you, girl. Yeah, sometimes I surprise myself and think of things that are like, oh, that's a pretty good idea. I worked for 21 years with special needs population in elementary school. And Jordan, you're right. With the diverse population there, it's typically a crapshoot because you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know how they're going to react. One day one thing works, the next day it's like, forget it, we're done. So, the thought process of thinking on your feet's really great. And the green hat is definitely something that you really need because you really need to think on your feet and try to figure out at that moment, what can I do to switch gears and get this person focused back on what we want to do? And I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but sometimes Renee throws something at me and I come up with something that's like, whoa. We do a lot of outreach at Will County Forest Preserve. And one of our key things is to try to bring people to reinstate native plants into their garden population so that we can reintroduce the native species of insects to recreate the food chain. So I said, well, I'm going to bring a threefold item with pictures, this, that, and the other about pollinators and such. And she goes, well, wait a minute. Why can't we do that with our communications team and see if we can do something that would be a permanent display? We can switch it out, this, that, and the other. So I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, we sat down, myself, Renee, one of our communications team members, and we did develop a foldable, transportable, changeable pollinator info center that has been widely used. It's been very well accepted. It draws people in. It's bright, it's colorful, it's got butterflies, bees, birds, flowers, everything on there. And that was part of a thing that was like, just me bringing a threefold science board, and it just became this beautiful display. And I was just like totally thrilled about the whole idea.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, sometimes we have to take off the hat that we're used to wearing, right? The natural hat that we were all easily, able to identify what our go-to hat is. It's interesting. Renee says she's my green hat. I love it. Lots of people in the chat box saying, right, it's a reminder to get outside of your own comfort zone and change hats, right? So there are situations that call for you to be in that risk mode. and consistently think about what the liabilities are and what the risk management aspect of things are. And so there are definitely times where you need to be wearing your black hat, right? And to, process things, but then there are other times when you need to, be wearing different colored hats. Jackie, I appreciate that you can identify that you have two different kind of natural styles to go to, red with your family and blue and green in work situations. We sometimes often find it hard to be the same person, right, at the office that we are, especially if you're a manager, right? Like I consistently have to tell myself that I'm not the boss at home, right? And so there are, times where you have to gain consensus, right? And you can't just, make those kinds of decisions. Harlan, interesting question. How do these hats relate to Trump's base and the rest of us, or do they? Can you expand on that question? Kelly Schultz, I also want to get to your question too, because I agree with you on this statement, but I want to talk to Harlan first. Oh, Harlan, you got a haircut. Look at you, handsome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What do you mean by this question?
Billy and I had a conversation. Billy, I'd like you to weigh in because I think your perspective might be valuable in terms of your reaction to what I said and mine to you.
Let's hear it, Billy.
Sure. I was just thinking about, everybody comes from different perspectives and different values. So to me, it didn't make sense to maybe categorize it into the two red-blue values, but keep it more focused on the fact that we respect everybody's opinions and difference and values and where they come to play in volunteerism.
Awesome.
And my response to Billy was, I appreciate your black hat perspective in reaction to my green hat off-topic thinking.
I am a systems thinker and an organization thinker. You are totally spot on there.
Yeah, that's cool. Cool. Yeah. Kelly, do you want to, I don't know if you're in a position where you can bring yourself off mute, but I see that your comment in the chat box is, it would be interesting to have a group write down their own hats and then have the group share what hats they saw on each other and compare the results. So tell me a little bit more about that, Kelly, if you're able to take yourself off mute.
Yeah, so I was just, hearing everybody's and reading everybody's responses about how we have different hats we wear in different situations. And even just the question of, well, what is my primary hat? And thinking that I do wear quite a few of these hats. So what is my go-to and how does that happen in different situations? So it would be interesting to kind of, especially if it's a team that you work with often, to maybe write it down either anonymously or as a group to say, yes, we think, Carrie has this hat that she really shines at that we value and we see that as her biggest strength, and to see how that fits with your own perspectives of how you think you're acting in that environment.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. So let's take that a step further as it relates to volunteerism, right? So we all have one thing in common, right? So we all work with volunteers in some capacity, whether we report to them as a board of directors or we work directly with coordinating volunteers and recruiting and training and retaining and all the good stuff that comes with volunteer coordination. Tell me what you thought about as it relates to your volunteers. We did a lot of internal, perspective where we thought about who we were and how we reacted. And in the scenario dive, we got to talk about, right, like how you process each of those different colored hats. Tell me how it relates to volunteerism in your organization. Like, what were the things that you took away from this conversation? Specifically as it relates to volunteer management, coordination, even recruitment, communication.
Carrie, I wouldn't mind weighing in on that. The demographics of our volunteers are the boomers, and it was very interesting how it really came to light to me that he was talking about they want to see what the results are. They want to see the data. They want to see, the fruitfulness of their labor. And for years, I've, couldn't understand when an event would be over. They'd be like, well, how much money did we make? Or how many people did we impact? And I'd be like, well, didn't you have a good time? Didn't we fulfill what we wanted to do? And they wanted those numbers. And I think that was very important to provide them with that. There's another demographic that we also use are the youth, and they could care less. They could care less if we made our quota or if we made the money we wanted to or whatever. And so their motivation was entirely different. And the after effects of it were not the same either. So that was good to really identify that early on in my volunteer coordinator position and capitalize on that. And I do have to go back to it every so often when I think, well, why am I not getting repeat volunteers in certain demographics? Oh, well, last time they volunteered, I didn't provide them with that data afterwards. They didn't have the satisfaction that they maybe had in other times. So that was very important for me to really identify that.
That's a really great point, Trudy. Tell me, what organization are you with?
I'm with the Poplar Grove Vintage Wings and Wheels Museum, or Education Association. So, and this last year has been really interesting because I'm the events and volunteer coordinator, and you can imagine that shifted, and I actually became building and grounds manager because we were not having any events. We weren't, coordinating as many volunteers. But getting back into this now for this new year, I'm really excited, and what Jordan was able to provide has given me kind of a spurring on for this new year with volunteers and getting back into that.
That's awesome. Thank you. Renee, I see you took yourself off mute.
Oh, okay. I was actually typing in the chat. Okay, yeah. So as the volunteer supervisor, I am asked by volunteers to be non-judgmental and data-driven, giving information to justify budgets, etc. That would be the white hat that I'm wearing on here, but then I constantly have to put the yellow hat on because then I deal with volunteers that have different viewpoints, and I have to bring them back to the mission of the Forest Preserve District. And yet that blue hat is always on hand because I need to make sure that that a good solid summary is available to any volunteer that asks for it at any time.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly wearing 3 hats.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I feel like mine are just kind of stacked on top of each other. Yeah, Matt can probably attest to that too, right? Like his probably reaction of, or my staff's reaction of, even my colleagues, right? People I work with that don't work for Habitat, my friends at Alignment Rockford, my friends at NCNE, like I work with a lot of the organizations that are here. And so, right, when I anticipate that people look at me, based on how they interact with me, and whether I'm a volunteer or I'm, a colleague or a boss or those kinds of things. So Jordan, I saw you took yourself off mute for a hot second. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that what's great about this is that you can use it in any, obviously you discover you can use it in any team partnership setting, right? So we talked about family, you talked about colleagues, you talked about volunteers, you talked about this, that, and the other. And what's really important to understand also is that while the goal is consensus at the end of any team, you don't have to start there, right? So you don't have to have everyone on the same page when you start that partnership. You can have all these different hats ebbing and flowing in each other. And I will say also, somebody mentioned earlier in the chat box, excuse me, about DISC and some of those personality tests. DISC was something we used a lot at this organization, and my DISC changed in the 5 years I was there, in part because I changed which hat I used predominantly, and I learned to be able to ebb and flow with the hats that I did. So I went from being super bubbly and super personable and to like, no, let me look at all the risks. Let me see what the damage is going to be. Let me talk about all the terrible things that are going to happen if we go this way, And so I had to learn to ebb and flow. And so just as when you start those teams or when you're forming those teams or you're in the middle of a team, yeah, your goal is consensus and your goal is to empower everyone to be on the same page. But it's okay to start with some different hats at the beginning and to be able to understand how those will impact.
That's cool. Thanks, Jordan. Let's talk about your current organizations. Again, I'm going to say this, I say this every single month. This is a safe place to have conversation. I recognize that, having conversations about generations and diversity and how people think differently might bring up some red flags for you. So you can take your black hat off. It's okay. Take a deep breath, right? This is a safe place to have a conversation. So let's talk about your organization. What do any of you work for organizations who value outwardly and intrinsically value different styles of thinking? And how, if so, how do you do that? Like, how does your organization do that? I see we have a few team members from alignment today. I think alignment, you do a good job of this. So Anisha, if you want to hop in, Esther, I know Jessica's on the call. I don't know if you guys are able to take yourself off mute or where you're at, but anybody from alignment, or even Robin, I see you're on from Rockford Rescue Mission. How do you guys have such a robust volunteer program, and you work with such a diverse population. Tell me, does the mission kind of embrace this idea of, you know, people have, there's Esther, I see you, I'm gonna come back to you. Robin, does the mission kind of, you know, foster and cultivate this idea of allowing people to think differently and using people's different skill sets to your advantage?
I think that we do. We find very quickly what people are gifted in, and part of that is in the interview that I talk to them about. I talk about their desires, and then I also tell them that they're not locked in, which I think is freeing for a lot of our volunteers. You know, I say, if you don't like cooking or prepping food, you know, there's other possibilities. If you, and then we have many times ended up finding volunteers who are very gifted at teaching and mentoring. And it's almost like you have to start as a volunteer prepping food or working at the thrift store, and then we see that gift of mentoring and accountability and leadership, and so then we pull you into other areas. But yes, absolutely, we love to evaluate and change up what someone's doing. That way they're never bored, and they always feel challenged, and they always seem to enjoy what's going on. So yeah, we do.
That's cool, thank you. I have another question later I think I'll talk to you about, especially with community service, but I'm gonna move to my friends in Alignment Rockford. So Esther and Jessica, I see you both. So in my opinion, from the outside, right, having been a volunteer with Alignment for many years now, I think that you recruit to this strategy. Like, would you agree with that statement?
Well, I've only been with the organization for a short amount of time, but I definitely have seen that that's how Anisha and Jessica work, the whole organization. I'm an intuitive, so one thing that I've done with my volunteers so far is try to understand where they're coming from. And also, I think it's really important that people feel valued. So I may not see something from the same perspective of that person, but understand if somebody seems combative or frustrated, like figuring out what's important to them and why they're thinking that way. Usually you can get on the same page if you just really listen and begin to figure out what's going on with that person. Because I really do believe that everybody has something to bring to the table. The people that are there, they're there for a reason. So finding, you know, why they're there, what matters to them, what are they getting out of it, and what do they feel like they could bring or change or help with, and understanding those kind of dynamics, and then again, making sure people feel valued. I think you get more of the best of people brought to the table when that's done, as opposed to this kind of like, I'm right, you're wrong, or we're gonna do it this way. I kind of picture shoving an elephant through a mouse hole when you work with people that way. So to me, it's really just trying to collaborate and understand one another and realize you're on the same team.
Yeah. Jessica, what do you want to add to that?
I just add, we have a lot of different teams that work together on different topics. So it's nice when we have our teams to come together, especially on the college and career readiness side, that have lots of ideas of how to engage our students, especially during the times that we're in. You know, we're trying to find the best thing we can to engage our high school students and getting them still, you know, work-based learning experiences, even virtually. So I think it's been an interesting year to see. I'm relatively still new to Alignment. I think in 7 months now, I lost track, but I think it's been really great to see everybody take their hats and just say, here's an idea. What can we do? Let's run with it, you know, or here's another idea of how to engage in the students. And everybody's not afraid to voice and say, maybe this would work, or maybe this won't work. And everybody is valued at that team that says, well, I think this will work better. And everybody takes it, so, okay, let's see if that works better and try it. So I think that's the best part about our volunteers is everybody brings something to the table and brings great ideas on how to engage our students. And I think the other part coming from alignment side is there's so much opportunity for engagement coming from college and career readiness to the Ready to Learn initiative that we're working on. So it's great. I just talked to a new volunteer the other day, and he's like young, and he was, you know, just new to the area. And he's like, I'm volunteering just to make hours right now, but I want to volunteer and make an impact. And so now he's sitting as an academy support team member at Auburn, and he is so excited to get involved with the students, and he's possibly going to become one of our board members because he's got ideas and he's energetic. And so it's just bringing that new energy to the table is super exciting.
Yeah. There's something really cool about, you know, having a diverse group of thinkers, right? So my mom would refer to that as a double-edged sword, right? That there's some really great advantages to that, and like having diversity in thinking, right? So like if you have somebody at the table who wears naturally a different color hat than everybody else does, right? Then they're like, you know, we refer to that person on our board as the devil's advocate. And that's Alan in our world, right? So like everybody will be like, this is so great, this is so great, this is so great. And then everybody will look at Alan and be like, what are you gonna say, right? Because like that's the role he plays. And he does a great job of that, right? We used to have an accountant on our board who consistently would be like, okay, slow down. We got to talk through, right? And so like he was consistently, you know, grounding us in the black hat and saying, you know, these are the risks that we have to think about, and these are the internal controls that we have to put in place, and these are the, you know, policies and procedures that we need to make sure that we have. And so what's cool about, I think, alignment in, and for those of you who aren't from the Rockford area, Alignment Rockford is a nonprofit organization that works to align resources for the Rockford Public School. And so we do that in a variety of ways, and we engage hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volunteers in all sorts of different, you know, avenues and committees. And Jessica's right. There's, you know, we work to try to find those people in the community who have those specific skill sets. And so when you think about volunteer recruitment, we don't just think about generational, right? So as a group, Exchange on Volunteerism has talked about generational recruitment, volunteer coordination and recruitment. This is another way for us to think about that, right? Is that there are generationally, right? Renee's right, or I think it was Renee who said, or maybe it was Trudy, that there were, you know, older generations that need the data. They want to know, how did we do? What was the impact? How much did we raise? How many people did we impact? Those kinds of things. And some of our younger volunteers were like, yeah, the DJ was cool, right? Like, and so we have to think about that, you know, that continuum, especially as we're recruiting volunteers, as we're working on, you know, volunteer retention, as we're working on recognition. Some people are more motivated by knowing like what the outcome was. How many more students graduated high school this year than graduated last year because of their, you know, experience, you know, with college and career readiness. So those kinds of things. So Trudy, I see you took yourself off mute for a second there. Did you have something you wanted to add? No.
Not at this point, no.
Okay, cool. So there's a few things in here. Okay, let's go back up here for a second. So Candace says, where I work now, I do believe that they value all styles of thinking. That's awesome. I'm super happy about that. However, I have worked places in the past, and they want to force you into a certain hat. And when I've been places like that, I have found a different job, because although I can wear many hats, my mental health will eventually react. And I cannot go to the hat I most prefer. So let's talk about that, right? Who's on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? So we talked about organizations that we think value ensuring that they have people on their team, volunteers, staff members, colleagues that come from different perspectives and have different hats that they wear. Tell me, have you worked for an organization that didn't value differences of opinions? Do you currently work for an organization that might, you know, try to put you in a box and say, this is how we do it, and this is how we think, and everybody has to conform to that. It can be volunteer on the volunteer side of things. It can be on staff side of things. It can be a previous job, a current job. Anybody want to expand on experiences that they've had? Maybe everyone's worked for an organization that has always valued every hat. Hey, Beth. Hi, Beth, I see you.
Hi. I currently work in an organization. I think it is very, very open and willing to work with people, work with different learning styles and different leadership styles. I have in the past worked in an organization where it was, you did what the boss told you to do, and you did it the way the boss told you to do it, and you did it right away, and you didn't question, and you didn't disagree, and it was very, very stressful.
Yep,
So,
I agree.
much happier in a more open and where I feel more valued.
Yeah, yeah. Does anybody work for the government or has worked for the government? Yeah, Renee and Barb, you work for a forest preserve district, which is really a government agency. Do you see that? Is there some governmental red tape that you feel you have to kind of maneuver, or do you feel like you have some autonomy?
Hence the multiple hats I wear on
Yes.
here. There are times when you have to be mission driven and you have to comply with certain things that are happening within the organization. However, over the years, I think I've built a relationship with many of the administrators that are there, the leadership team, that they value the opinion of the person in my position or the volunteer supervisor and the teams, that it can accomplish tasks with some freedoms per se on here. So yes and no. I mean, obviously there are certain things that we do have to, and again, that's the main reason that I wear the many hats I wear.
That's a great point. Felicia, I'm happy to see your comment on here. So glad to see managers taking this class. The reason organizations have heavy employee turnover is because management fails to recognize good talent. I think you're right about that. I've worked at a couple of places where, I've struggled to be able to be creative and think outside of the box and to bring new ideas and fresh perspectives and those kinds of things. So I think you're right. People don't necessarily quit jobs, they quit managers. And it's good that we're able to engage, right? People from all sorts of different aspects and areas of organizations. And so we wear a lot of different hats, right? Not just the colored hats and the thinking hats, but we all have different roles that we play. Trudy mentioned it earlier that she does events and volunteer coordination. If Leah Kern were on the call, she would say she's the wedding coordinator, the volunteer coordinator. She has like 1,000 different titles in her title at Anderson Japanese Gardens. And so, and now Trudy, you're grounds and maintenance, right? Because that's the same thing as coordinating volunteers and running special events. So sometimes we got to literally put on different hats. And so it's good to have people from a variety of different leadership positions. Kimberly, I'm going to come back to your question, but I promise you we'll get there. Terry, interesting comment. We do things the way the boss wants them, but use our hats in ways to get to the end result. Fantastic comment. I would anticipate that my staff would say the same thing, is that we do things my way, but the way we get there is different every time, right? And so on every Friday, our team gets together and has kind of a powwow. We call it Meeting of the Minds. And we bring everybody's opinions and ideas to the table. Ultimately, right, decision-making processes end up, either being my final decision or the board's. And so we don't always agree, right, with what the board chooses or those kinds of things. So Candace, interesting. My organization used to be more open to different perspectives, but as it grew, it became less and less open. And now the way to get your ideas heard is through the chain of your manager, then a member of leadership. It's the same with volunteer as far as getting their ideas heard. Interesting. Candace, do you want to expand on that a little bit? Maybe tell us, if you're not interested in telling us where you work, kind of what work you do?
Kind
I know that some of you might be in the car and it's not easy to take yourself off mute. So if you can't, that's okay too.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. So I work at a food pantry, and it grew quite a while over the course of the 6 years that I've been with it. And so when I first started there, it was a very open environment. Everyone from all different levels of the organization could literally sit at the table and get their ideas put out there, not necessarily guaranteeing that something will happen, but at least you were able to speak. And then as it grew, the structure was very different. And so now it's more so you talk amongst your direct team, and then the manager from your direct team will pass it up the chain. I remember a time when volunteers, but when I first started, volunteers could come in and directly see the executive director, directly talk with the director of operations. But now that's, they're all over the place. They're not necessarily on site when the volunteers come in.
Yep.
And the volunteers have to come through a coordinator like myself, or they have to, schedule like time to meet with someone if they want to express their ideas. And if the volunteer has been there for a long, long time, that's an adjustment for them because they're kind of used to being heard. But if it's a newer volunteer, then, everything is good. They're not so much aware of the change.
That's great. Thanks for expanding on that. We had some growing pains too. So our organization has grown pretty exponentially. When I started in 2014, we had 5 staff. 3 of us were part-time. Sorry, 3 of us were full-time, 2 of us were part-time, and now there are 21 of us. We went from a $450,000 annual organization to a $2.2 million organization in 6 years. And so our volunteers also felt pushed out of the process. And we still experience some growing pains around that, right? Like even just recently had a conversation with a board member about, we used to be able to do this with no staff. And now all of a sudden, like we have all these staff, like what do you need volunteers for? So we have to consistently think about, right, their perspective and, where they came from, and ensure that we are consistently, including them in decision-making processes, and not just our board members, right? So our board members get to make strategic decisions, but many of our volunteers are struggling with that. I used to be able to do more, and now we have staff that do that kind of thing. Yeah. Jackie, I see that you used to work in a private sector. So I think private sector is probably a lot like government. I used to work as a probation officer, and so I can relate to this statement. I used to work in a private sector at a company that more so expected you to follow whatever the boss said. But I started introducing a lot of new creative ways to organize things they couldn't ignore. We're making our project process much more efficient. These ideas ended up being used nationwide. So I think there is something really powerful about perspectives, right? And ensuring that you're hearing everyone's perspective, and that you're, taking off this hat and putting on a different one, and being like, this is my natural hat, but what if I, thought about it from this different perspective? So, all right, Harlan, sorry, I missed that. Trying to manage both. Survived 3 months as a census enumerator. What is that, Harlan? Not easy for my green hat style, a real learning experience. Tell me what that is.
It's going door to door and helping with the U.S. Census, looking for the U.S. government.
No, thank you. Yeah, that is, that's not for me. Yep. Nope, could not do door to door. I would never, I'd be terrible at that. Way out of my comfort zone. Yeah, for a green hat thinker, it's hard. That would definitely be hard, I would anticipate.
And yet essential, because these are people who had managed to evade, not responding by phone, not responding online, not responding at all, and still not being, not 4 or 5 other people who had knocked on their door and they hadn't answered or been there. And so I had to be creative.
Yeah, yeah. So Kimberly, I'm going to come back to, oh, Esther, I see you just came off and you muted yourself. Do you want to add a comment?
I worked in sales in the past, so I was kind of understanding what he was saying, and it was 100% commission. And you have to check your attitude, because if you don't learn how to relate to people, you won't eat. So that was a big learning experience for me, because you would meet with somebody, and then if you didn't sell, you'd walk away, or even if you did, you'd walk away evaluating, like within your head, like what worked, what didn't work, how could I have related better, and thinking, okay, something that a boss said to me that never left me was, because I went to an appointment and they didn't buy anything, and they said they didn't need advertising, and my boss said if they took the appointment, they wanted something. And realizing you got to find out what people want. And I think I said a little bit about that earlier, but like, why are people showing up? What's their motivation? To sit in an appointment where someone says, they've given you an advertising, they give you an advertising appointment, but then they say, I don't need advertising. So I learned to say, okay, well, you took this appointment, you know, what were you hoping for? And I had one client say, well, such and such organization got What Rocks with Rockford's newspaper, and we got overlooked, but we're better. And I came up with this whole thing for them to support non-for-profits and do this like campaign supporting non-for-profits, and they bought it. They didn't need advertising. And it was just like learning to figure out people's why and what they want, because you're sitting in a meeting and you're thinking, why did you take this appointment if you don't need advertising? And it would have been so easy to just skip past that and be like, well, okay, nice meeting you. But just even with volunteers, thinking sometimes you have volunteers, and this is something I'm trying to learn myself right now. I do not have this sussed, but people coming and maybe not participating, and you're thinking, why are they there? And I've been trying to think about, you know, how can I meet with them one-on-one? What can I do to figure out their why, or, you know, what they want to get out of it, or what they want to bring to it.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because they did take that meeting for a reason. Yeah, that's a great point. Jordan, I see you also came off mute.
Yeah, I was just going to say that that is really a high level of emotional intelligence. So being able to have that meeting and in that moment be able to say, pick up on indicators, right? So they are an out loud thinker, they are an in-head processor. What I'm saying is not motivating them. You know, being able to have those moments in the meeting where you're thinking, okay, I have to course direct a little bit here because this is not working. And so I'm glad to see people are picking up on past experiences, because that's really what the 6-head thinking is about, is being able to not only do it when it's a planned setting, but do it when it's an unplanned setting, and being able to say, whoa, okay, I went into this the wrong way. Let me in the next 5 minutes turn this around real quick and strain. And I think in that setting also it's appropriate to say, you know, another meeting is needed, right? So maybe the first meeting is just the first meeting, right? So maybe it's just that. They don't want anything out of it other than human connection. And then there's the next one, and you have a little time to prepare. So picking up on all those social context cues is super important.
Cool, thank you. So Kimberly, your question are, how are organizations engaging volunteers during the pandemic? So Kimberly, are you still on?
Yes, I am. And my computer was about to disconnect, so I was trying to join again on my phone.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I work for a housing authority, and I do have 2 VISTA volunteers. So they are paid in their capacity, but they're still considered volunteers. So, you know, we are engaging those individuals and learning in 2 endeavors that we are that we're undertaking. But we do have the capacity to have more volunteers, but because of the pandemic, there's that fear of, you know, engaging with individuals and, you know, becoming infected. So we don't meet directly with people. We wouldn't want to bring people in that would have to meet directly with people. We don't have gatherings to engage volunteers. So it's mostly paperwork or, you know, meetings. And I'm just kind of curious how other organizations are engaging volunteers.
That's a great question. Anybody want to share what your organization is currently doing?
Hi, it's Jessica.
Hey, Jessica.
We do Zoom, a lot of Zoom. We have found fun ways to do things on Zoom. We do jam boards. We do breakout sessions. We just recently had our college and career readiness team. We're trying to work on some YouTube panels for live expert panels to do some live interaction with our students. So in that, we've decided to do breakout sessions and I'm still learning Zoom. We had them all go out into different breakout groups and talk about, 3 or 4 different topics and give them some good discussion to focus on in those groups, and then brought it back together. We do a lot. I call my volunteers, say hi. We've done a lot of engagement with our school. We've done live speaker events where we did, I think we had 45 speakers that did via Zoom. Carrie can attest, she was one of them. Carrie's amazing. She does so much for our organization. But it was 20 minutes. The students dialed into a Zoom call, and our industry experts spoke to the students directly via Zoom. So we're trying to think outside the box, but we do a lot on Zoom, and we do a lot trying to find interesting ways to keep them engaged while we're on Zoom. Where it's not just me speaking the whole time, where it's trying to get some more engagement.
Okay.
We've actually grown our volunteer base quite a bit through COVID, so that's exciting. I think it's also the nature of what we do that we've grown it, because people are very passionate about getting in front of students and education and getting our students the experiences they need in order to be successful in careers. So people have come out and said, what can I do to help these students? I know we're struggling. The school districts are struggling. The students are struggling. So people are really, really heavily engaged. And what can I do to help the students? I will do a speaker event. I will help with mock interviews. Whatever you need me to do, I'll do, so we can engage the students.
Andy put a great comment in the chat box. Our volunteers are writing letters to seniors who are isolated. Brilliant. They're making blankets for people in nursing homes, and we started a friendly caller program. Also, they're helping with pickups and deliveries where they don't have to see people. We're wanting our volunteers to be more in our schools, but the schools are resistant, which I totally get, yeah. One of the things Matt and myself and our team at Habitat have been working on is some kind of dual engagement with some of our faith-based organizations. And so we interface with a lot of churches. And one of the things we've heard from our church pastors is that their congregations are lonely and that they're really missing this kind of social connection. And so one of the things we're going to start doing is kind of pairing our clients with congregations, and we're going to ask our partner churches to write letters and become pen pals with some of our homeowners, and to create this kind of connection. We're talking about helping with card showers and, those kinds of, different things where we can partner with other organizations and, do a little bit of a win-win. Our volunteers are looking for social interaction. And so we're trying social events via Zoom and, just checking in with them regularly, those kinds of things. We also have external volunteer opportunities, right? So we still allow volunteers on our construction sites. We allow volunteers at our resource. We do allow volunteers in some capacity, just a pretty limited capacity. So, Kristen,
Carrie, hi, this is Diane. Me and Candy, we work together, and we've really noticed an increase with our volunteers. They're afraid of leaving their homes because we're down here in Southern Illinois, and our numbers have really been rising drastically lately. And the social isolation phone calls have really increased. They've really enjoyed it. We spent 3 days, because we cover 13 counties, we spent 3 days, the last 3 days of Christmas, passing out Christmas cards to nursing homes. And what we did is we posted on Facebook to all the different Facebook sites asking for people to donate cards. And we had an overwhelming support from the communities. All we said, just drop them off or call me and we'll meet you at the gas station and get them. And that way we were able to keep the social distancing at the same time. And the communities, they want to help, but they're afraid to help. So we're giving them another opportunity to do it. It's like right now we're doing a sock drive. And again, we're reaching out to the schools. And the schools are like, well, how can we help? And again, it's just let us know, we'll come pick it up. That way they don't have to go all about, we'll be the one who's exposing ourselves. You know, just letting them know there's ways of doing it.
That's cool. Thank you. Kimberly, we would love to have you join us regularly. This happens on a monthly basis, and this year we're spending a lot of time talking about diversity and how we engage different types of volunteers in our organization. And so we'd love to continue to have you be a part of this conversation. NCNE is a great organization to reach out to. Any of us on this call also, I'm happy to chat with you. But Billy and Pam are fantastic resources. They're connected to like every nonprofit in Rockford, so we're really in Northern Illinois. And so lots of ideas, they talk to nonprofits all the time, so we can certainly help with ideas as it relates to engagement during COVID. So
awesome.
I really appreciate, yeah, of course, thanks for being here. I appreciate your presentation, Jordan. I see that Dr. Shatterman is on the call today, so I'm sure she is beaming with NIU pride right now, getting to see you present this to our group at NCNE. So thanks, Jordan, for your time and for your energy and for your excellent opportunity to engage in this conversation. So thanks for joining us. Billy, I know you probably have some announcements. Pam, I see you're off mute too, so I'm going to stop talking. Thanks for joining us. I will see you next month, and I'm going to hand it over to my friends at NCNE.
I just want to say thank you again, Jordan. Fantastic presentation, wonderful resources. Carrie, as always, dynamic, fun. Thank you for leading the conversation, and thank you all for participating. I love how you put your green hat on at the end to talk about the creative things that you're doing in your organization as it relates to COVID. And then I want to introduce Billy Callahan. She's the Associate Director at NCNE and is going to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that we have coming up.
Hi, thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen here. We have some events that I want to share with you. So thanks for bearing with us and hanging in here for these last couple of minutes. Some important, exciting upcoming events that we have that I want to share. So the Healing Illinois Initiative had granted funds to the United Way of Northwestern Illinois and NCNE to provide free diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings to nonprofits in our area. So we have an Eventbrite page that I've linked into the chat. You can find that there if you want to sign up or learn more. But on February 5th, we are starting with a free DEI training that's going to be led by Dr. Adrian Coleman and Dr. Tracy Ellis of Candid Conversations. I'm excited to be offering that to you. We have 4 consecutive workshops. You can see the dates there on the top that explain that. And I know we're short on time, so I'm going to zip through on to the next. And we have on March 19th, free facilitator training led through the same organization, Candid Conversations Matter, and also free to you because of the same funds awarded from Healing Illinois in partnership with United Way of Northwestern Illinois. So on March 19th, there's going to be a training to train facilitators to hold courageous conversations and engage in and lead healthy discourse around issues of diversity and inclusion, discussing barriers to racism and patterns of inequity that exist within our organizations and the broader society. Following that training, there'll be 3 communities of practice for trained facilitators to work together, foster community and skills, and just build those skills. So that's following the event on April 16th, May 21st, and June 18th. The last thing I want to share with you is our next session. We have Dr. Elisa Shatterman, who is going to join us, and she's been in the call this morning, which is fantastic to see her with us. That will take place on February 3rd. So when I email out the recording for today's session and the evaluation, I will also email you information for the upcoming session. Dr. Shatterman is going to lead a panel conversation on current trends in volunteerism and disaster volunteerism and episodic volunteerism. So we look forward to that. So with that, again, I want to thank you, and thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Jordan, and the group. The conversation is always fantastic, and we really look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks,
everyone. Take care.
Bye.